Hello, how are you doing today? I hope you're doing well. So, today in biology, I want us to look at sense organs. All right, and under the sense organs, we are going to define what a sense organ is. And particularly today, the sense organ that I want us to focus on is the human eye. All right, so a sense organ is any body organ that is responsible for detecting one or more stimuli. So a stimuli, remember we said it is anything or a change in the environment that causes the organism to react. So human beings have examples of sense organs that helps to detect some stimuli. And among the sense organs that human beings have, number one, they have the eye. So this eye is responsible for detecting light energy. And then apart from eye, we have the skin, which is responsible for detecting touch, temperature, pressure, as well as pain. And then we have the nose chemoreceptors, which detect chemicals in air. And then we have the tongue chemoreceptors, which are responsible for detecting the chemicals that are in food. And then finally, we have my favorite, which is the ear, which is responsible for detecting your sound energy, responsible also for balance, posture, and pressure. Like when we talk about the different parts of the ear, we'll learn more about that. So today, I want us to start with the human eye, and this is the external structure of the human eye. So under the external structure of the eye, we are simply having our eyebrows. Apart from the eyebrows, you have the eyelashes. And apart from the eyelashes, we are able to appreciate this part which is mostly white, which is the cornea. And then finally, we have this part, which is the iris. And the inner part, which is inside there, that we call the pupil, or others will call it a pupil. And then we finally move on to the longitudinal section of the eye, where we are able to appreciate this structure. And under we have this biggest side, so we call this the vitreous humor. Apart from the vitreous humor, we have this part here, which looks like a diffracted hole here. This one, we call it the blind spot. And then finally, we have this whole region, which is down here. This is known as the optic nerve. And we also have another one, which is on this side, which is almost having the same structure like the blind spot. We call this the fovea, or the yellow spot, the fovea centralis, or the yellow spot. And then finally, we have this line which is going there. We call that the retina. And then we have this one which looks to be a bit dark in color. That is our choroid. And this part just after the choroid, we call it the sclera. And apart from all these structures that we have identified, we have this structure which is usually in front here, the one which is there. This one is our cornea, and this is our iris. And remember, the iris has got two muscles. It has the sacral and the radial muscles, and these muscles act antagonistic to each other. Finally, we have this part in front here, which is the aqueous humor, and then we have the lens, which are inside there, and we have the suspensory ligament, which is there, and our ciliary body, which is there, and our ciliary muscle, which is there. So all these are the parts under the longitudinal section of the eye. Now let's look at the functions of all these parts of the eye that we have mentioned. Let's start with our sclera, which is this region which is here. So the sclera, this one is responsible for touch. It is actually the tough fibrous outer coat which maintains the spherical shape of the eyeball. Apart from maintaining the spherical shape of the eyeball, it also protects the eye against damage, and it also provides attachment for external eye muscles, the rectus and the oblique muscles, right? So these are the external muscles that the eye has, the erector as well as the rectus and the oblique muscles. So these muscles are going to help to move the eye in its sockets, and this layer is usually white and opaque. All right, then that's the function of the sclera. We've simply said the sclera helps to maintain the spherical shape of the eyeball. Apart from that, it also protects against damage and provides attachment for external eye muscles. So these are the external eye muscles. We also mentioned that the iris also has two kinds of muscles, the circular and the radial muscles. So let's move on to another part of the eye, which is the cornea. All right, this region which is here. So the cornea is the transparent section of the sclera found in the front of the eye. It does most of the refraction of light rays from an object, and this leads to the formation of an inverted and diminished image on the retina. So this one, you can simply say it is responsible for refraction of light rays. Now, if you remember in physics, refraction is simply the bending of light as it strikes or crosses a certain media. So the light ray has to bend. So the one that is responsible for this refraction of light is the cornea as the part of the eye. We move on to another part, which is the dark region which we mentioned here, which is the choroid. So this choroid is a dark layer that contains blood vessels, right? So your eyes needs to have blood vessels. So the dark color limits internal reflections to that, so that the clear images are formed, right? We know to say these internal reflections, once they occur, they are going to cause different eye conditions such as presbyopia, myopia, and all those other conditions that we can talk about. All right, so that for the clear images to be formed, this choroid needs to contain some blood vessels. Apart from the blood vessels, we know that these blood vessels are simply providing oxygen and food to the different cells of the eye and also of the retina. So we are saying this choroid also contains the dark color, which limits internal reflection, which is simply the bouncing back of light, right? So that internal reflection is going to be prevented by this choroid, and the one that is responsible for refraction is this structure, which is the cornea. Let's now move on to another one, which is the interesting one, the retina. So this retina, this is the layer containing light sensitive cells where images form and light energy is converted to nerve impulses. Okay, so these light sensitive cells that we are talking about, we have the cones and the rods. These are the light sensitive cells. So the cones form a clear, detailed color image when there is high light intensity, all right, or when there is bright light. The ones that are active during that time the most are what we call the cones. And the portion of the retina having higher concentration of cones is called the fovea, or the yellow spot. So this fovea and yellow spot, or this fovea or yellow spot, is usually having a high concentration of the cones. And we said the cones are the ones that are responsible for color images when there is so much bright light. All right, then the rods form a blurred black and white image. This is usually at low intensity or dim light. So the ones that deal with dim light, black and white, it is these ones, the rods. They are the ones that are responsible for that. Let's move on to another part, which is the blind spot. So the blind spot is simply a portion corresponding to the exit point of the optic nerve. So we said this is our blind spot when we go back. So this is the blind spot, right? So the blind spot here is being described to say the blind spot is the one that is responsible for. All right, and on this blind spot, we are simply saying it is the exit point for the optic nerve. So there on the blind spot, there are no light sensitive cells. We don't have the rods, we don't have the cones on this blind spot. And here, light that falls on the blind spot cannot be detected. No wonder it is called the blind spot, which is simply the exit point of the optic nerve. So let me make another video where I'll now explain on the optic nerve and the other eye structures.